It is the single best documented case of non-human intelligence interacting with humans, and it's been ignored or kept secret by the government for over half a century. But in 1957, the United States Air Force collected definitive proof that it was not alone in the skies over America. What would follow is a culture of secrecy so deadly that modern whistleblowers like David Grush, a decorated U.S. intelligence official, have claimed that the government has killed to keep it a secret. On the night of September 19th to September 20th, 1957, a U.S. Air Force RB-47 was on a training flight prior to deploying to Europe. The RB-47 was a modified version of the medium bomber jet propulsion B-47 and built specifically for fighting a nuclear conflict. In the case of a nuclear war, the jet would be responsible for gathering weather information along bombing routes to facilitate subsequent strikes, as well as monitor radio and radar stations for either targeting or to help friendly air forces avoid detection. It was the foremost electronic warfare aircraft of its time, which is what makes its encounter with a non-human craft the single most credible UFO encounter of all time. The RB-47 in question was flying out of Forbes Air Force Base in Topeka, Kansas, on a route that would take it out to the Gulf of Mexico and back again over the south-central U.S. During its flight, it would perform gunnery and navigation exercises while over the Gulf before swinging back around and engaging in electronic countermeasure exercises on the return back to base. The six-man crew included 3 electronic warfare officers manning the most sophisticated ECM gear in the world at the time, and it would be this gear that confirmed their otherworldly encounter. As it would later be remarked, you could simply not ask for a better set of instruments to have been present during the encounter. The flight was supposed to be a routine exercise to prepare the crew before their rebasing to Germany. But as the aircraft crossed the Mississippi coast near Gulfport, the ECM gear detected a strange signal emanating from the plane's 5 o'clock position. To ECM operator Frank B. McClure, the signal appeared almost exactly like a ground-based radar signal, which would be used for area surveillance and directing of aircraft. However, the signal's origin was coming from out in the Gulf. McClure at first assumed that there was a problem with the equipment and that there was a 180-degree ambiguity causing signals coming from the 11 o'clock position to show as if they were coming from 5 o'clock. This would explain the strange radar pulse, as on the mainland there were numerous air traffic control radars active. He figured that the signal he was picking up was simply a radar operating somewhere in Louisiana, a suspicion strengthened by the fact that the signal he was picking up was at 2,800 megacycles, a common frequency used by S-band search radars. However, McClure observed the strange signal suddenly move up scope, swinging over the nose of the aircraft and then move down scope to the opposite side. This would have been impossible for even an inverted signal error or any ground radar to perform. Only a high-flying and very fast aircraft with a powerful search radar could have conducted such a maneuver. Either that or the top-secret equipment McClure was instructed to destroy should the plane be forced to crash land was a pile of junk. However, the signal was so bizarre that McClure did in fact chalk it up to some unknown error. There was, after all, simply no possible way that any aircraft could be performing the radical maneuver that the sensitive ECM gear indicated was occurring. Thus, he did not report the incident to the pilots, nor even to his 2 colleagues operating the other ECM equipment. As the signal faded and the plane continued on, the incident was forgotten. But McClure had no idea that he had just recorded definitive proof that an extremely anomalous technological craft had scanned his own aircraft in a nearly 360-degree orbit. The aircraft continued on toward Jackson, Mississippi. The crew was busy performing a scheduled ECM exercise that consisted of detecting and taking action against Air Force ground radars that were along this leg of the flight. As the aircraft turned west over Jackson, though, pilot Louis D. Chase spotted what he believed were landing lights from another aircraft moving toward his own from the 11 o'clock position. The aircraft appeared to be nearly level with the RB-47 and was closing fast, becoming a very bright white light. Chase grew increasingly concerned as the unidentified craft sped straight toward him, until he finally alerted the crew to be ready for extreme evasive maneuvers. Believing that he would collide with this unknown jet aircraft, Chase prepared to perform a sudden dive, but then the bright white light abruptly and instantaneously changed the direction of travel. In the blink of an eye, the light changed its trajectory from nearly head-on to their aircraft to the plane's 2 o'clock, moving so fast that Chase would later recall that it was like nothing he had ever seen, or ever would see during his career. Just as suddenly, the light blinked out of existence. Chase and co-pilot James H. McCoy began to discuss the incredible event over the plane's interphone. In the rear of the plane, McClure remembered the strange radar signal that he'd recorded on his instruments and the way that it seemed to almost perform a full orbit around the aircraft as if scanning it with radar. He informed the pilots and the rest of the crew and then got the idea to set his number 2 monitor to begin scanning at the same frequency as the earlier radar receipt. To his surprise, he got a strong signal coming straight from the aircraft's 2 o'clock position, exactly where the pilot said the strange bright light had moved to just after it nearly collided with the aircraft. John J. Provenzano, operating another set of ECM equipment, performed a diagnostic on the number 2 monitor utilizing valid and known ground radar stations and confirmed that the equipment was performing optimally. He then used his number 1 monitor to double-check the signal for himself and confirmed the exact same radar signal being broadcast at the aircraft from its 2 o'clock. The crew continued to monitor the signal, believing that there was a chance that this was simply a ground-based radar that coincidentally was in the same direction the unknown craft had taken. But as the plane continued along its flight path, the signal did not move down scope as would be expected from a stationary ground source. Whatever was blasting the aircraft with tracking radar, it was keeping perfect pace with them. Now the entire aircraft was alert and focused on this problem. They were being tracked by an unknown craft that was beyond the capabilities of any known American craft. Given the tensions of the Cold War at the time, there was a real concern that they might be dealing with an unknown Soviet craft of incredible capability. Chase decided to vary his flight speed to see if the signal would change. But with every variation in the aircraft's speed, the signal remained in exactly the same spot relative to the plane. For over 100 miles, the unknown craft perfectly matched every maneuver that Chase made. By now, the RB-47 was approaching radar coverage area of the Carswell Air Force Base Ground-Controlled Intercept Unit near Fort Worth, Texas. The crew contacted Carswell GCI and asked if they had any other air traffic close to their plane. Carswell would respond immediately that they were tracking another aircraft approximately 10 miles off their 2 o'clock position. The RB-47 was being tracked by both radar and its IFF transponder, but this unknown craft was only being tracked by radar alone. This was alarming for the crew. While they might have had their suspicions about what they were being chased by, the lack of an IFF transponder confirmed for them a growing fear. This was not a friendly American aircraft. By now, the crew had time to analyze the signal better with their top-secret gear. For all appearances, the signal was exactly what one would expect from a normal search and tracking radar, which the crew were extremely familiar with. The signal would not have been out of place at nearly any airport or military installation in the world. However, there was something entirely exotic about this signal. While it appeared like a perfectly normal, known human radar signal, even going so far as to simulate the scan rate, the signal was so powerful that according to McClure, the antenna would have had to been larger than an entire bomber to put out that much power. Something was masquerading as a normal, ordinary human radar, even simulating the scan rate of a mechanical radar, which emits pulse as it rotates, but it couldn't hide its massive power output, on par with modern ground or ship-based search and track radar, and far out of reach of any human military at the time. Suddenly, McClure saw that the signal was moving up scope on his number 2 monitor, confirmed by the immediate message from Carswell that the craft that they were tracking was moving forward of the RB-47. In the cockpit, the pilots couldn't see anything, and yet both the ECM gear and Carswell ground radar tracked the invisible object as it moved ahead to the nose of the aircraft, still keeping several miles of separation between them. Without warning, a massive red glow appeared directly ahead of the aircraft, with the pilots describing it as bigger than a house. Given the 10-mile separation between the object and the plane, this object had to be emitting quite powerful lights to cause the pilots to describe it in such a way. Now, there was independent confirmation of the object from the plane's ECM gear, Carswell's radar, and the pilots who were watching the strange red light keep pace with their plane directly ahead of them. Chase decided to try to catch up with the object and increased speed to nearly 500 knots. However, the object maintained a 10-mile separation no matter how fast the RB-47 moved, until finally the strange craft began to veer to the right of the plane toward Dallas. Chase contacted the FAA and requested permission to alter his flight path so that he could follow the object. Confirming there was no other air traffic in the area, he was given permission, and Chase banked toward the object. As he picked up speed, the glow began to grow brighter, and he realized that he was finally catching up with it. Carswell then contacted the FAA to inform them that the unknown craft had come to a complete stop. This finally gave him an opportunity to get a good visual on the object, and Chase continued to fly directly toward it. The RB-47 closed in on the object from above, but as they neared it, the pilot suddenly saw the craft blink out of existence. At the same time, McClure announced that the radar signal had disappeared from his scope, and Carswell confirmed that they too had lost track of the object. Chase put the aircraft into a left turn to get back onto their flight path, and while banking the plane, they kept checking back in the direction they had come from for the object. Halfway through the 20-mile turn, they suddenly saw the red light blink back into existence, right along the path the aircraft had taken but at a much lower elevation. Carswell and McClure both confirmed that the object was back nearly simultaneously. Chase and the rest of the crew wanted answers, and thus he contacted Carswell and asked for permission to do something decidedly outside the purview of the RB-47's design. Chase wanted to dive the aircraft straight down onto the strange object to finally get a good look at it. After a brief deliberation, he was given the green light. Swinging the big plane around, he put it into a steep dive, coming down on the object that was now below and ahead of the plane. Once the RB-47 reached around 20,000 feet, though, the object once more blinked out of existence. Carswell and McClure both confirmed its disappearance once more simultaneously. The aircraft was now low on fuel and needed to head back to base. However, as the plane got back into a homeward course, McClure detected the radar signal hitting their aircraft from dead astern. The crew attempted to spot the object using the top blisters along the roof of the aircraft, but the unknown object was now behind and below them at an estimated 15,000 feet. The light would follow them all the way back to Oklahoma before finally disappearing. All in all, the RB-47 would be engaged by the strange craft for over 600 miles. The incredibly high-profile incident would come under review during the infamous Condon Report. Hired by the Air Force to study UFOs, Edward Condon put together a committee of investigators to come to a conclusion on the UFO phenomenon. In an infamous 1968 report, the committee would state that there was no credible evidence of non-human intelligence or advanced technology at work over the skies of the United States, and that most incidents were simply misidentifications. However, Condon's credibility was questioned by both the public and the people who had been intimately involved in Project Blue Book, the source for the material that the Condon Committee reviewed. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, originally a skeptic on the UFO phenomenon, would not only come to be a believer himself as a result of his Air Force investigation, but would condemn Condon for an unscientific review of the material presented. Condon's credibility was further tarnished when it was revealed that he stated prior to his investigation that the UFO phenomenon was essentially a nothing burger, but he wasn't supposed to come to that conclusion until after his investigation. The Condon Committee's conclusion of the RB-47 incident would completely ignore significant portions of the events as told by the crew. It would also downplay the tracking of the unknown object via as many as 4 different instruments, as well as its identification by both intercepting its radar signal and being picked up on radar itself. The Condon investigation would conclude that if an object was truly following the aircraft, then the aircraft's own radar should have picked it up. However, the crew of the plane would explain that the radar currently on board the RB-47 could only track a tanker-sized target at a distance of 4 miles. This would mean that for the aircraft to pick up the object on its own radar at a distance of 10 miles as confirmed by Carswell, then it would have to be over twice as large as an airborne tanker. The RB-47 incident remains to this day the best publicly known evidence of a non-human technology over the skies of America, as confirmed by top-secret electronic monitoring gear of the day. It could very well be the first recording of an alien signal, which seemed to at least attempt to hide its origin by mimicking human radars, but it could not hide its power output, which if human would have required an antenna as big as a football field. Now go check out Soviet Union declassified UFO encounters revealed, or click this other video instead.